Good morning and welcome back to another Duval 22 podcast. My name is Gus Logue. I'm thrilled to be joined by Mia O'Brien today to preview the Super Bowl 60 between the New England Patriots and the Seattle Seahawks, a rematch of the big game that we got a few years ago when Malcolm Butler made that huge life-changing interception at the end of the game. Hopefully we'll get an even better game this time around. I don't know if that will really be possible, but obviously it's a very fun week for all football fans, even if your team isn't in it, even if your team has never made the Super Bowl. Jacksonville is one of four teams to have that honor or dishonor, I guess might be a better word. But yeah, it's always a fun week to talk about the Super Bowl. It's the biggest game of the year, obviously, and we're gonna try to have a conversation that relates it back to Jaguars fans. But Mia, first of all, thank you for being here. How has your offseason been so far?
Been good. It's been busy, needless to say. Gustav, great to see you. And of course, fresh cut here on this fine Wednesday that we're recording the podcast. We've got a lot cooking between Club 904, the women's basketball podcast over at Locked On with the Squad Show, and then, of course, all things leadership over at UNF. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, as we're getting ready for the big game, this is great prep for me because I will be hosting on ESPN Countdown to 61 as ESPN takes the handoff from NBC and we
Hmm.
prepare for ESPN's first Super Bowl in their 42 years. And so I'm going to be doing the overnight from 3 to 6 a.m. Eastern, 12 to 3 p.m. on the Pacific Coast. So, hey, if you're going to be up late or up early, make sure you hang out with me and Q Myers. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I actually, before we hopped on this call, I got the email from my producer with a lot of the branding and stuff. So it's going to be a really, really good time. Although I'm very excited to test my ability to speak eloquently at 4 a.m. on live radio.
Yeah, that'll be a challenge, but it's always fun to do something for the first time, I guess. I assume that's going to be like your first middle of the night hit.
Yes, yep. I've done a lot of game night on ESPN. So
Yeah.
that's 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., which is a former local news hound. Like that's my wheelhouse.
Mm.
That's when I do my best work. But 3 to 6 a.m., we're about to figure out if I ever could have been a morning newsie, which I don't know if that's ever going to be in the cards, but we're going to try. And it's going to be a lot of fun because Q keeps the energy high. And we're going to be reacting not only to a great game that we're expecting on Sunday, but also looking ahead to next year when the Super Bowl returns to Los Angeles.
That is one of the questions I have for you. We'll tackle that at the very end. I'm interested to see or to hear what you think about the Jaguars' 2027 Super Bowl aspirations, or at least their probability or chances of making that game. But we do want to talk about the 2026 Super Bowl first, and I wanted to make sure we did this podcast this week as opposed to next week, because next week it'll all be all about like what did the Seahawks do right and like where do they go from here and like or I said the Seahawks, but like whoever the winner is gonna be,
Right.
like
Well,
what did
I
the
mean,
winner
do we
do
already
right?
know who the winner is, Gus, or are you going
Yeah.
to lead the pod with that?
What did the winner do right? What did the loser do wrong and stuff like that. But like I think it's important to be like both of these teams made it to the Super Bowl. That's a major accomplishment. Like what have both of these teams done right or done well that like other not just fans but like teams can like kind of appreciate and take away from and learn something. And so I'll lead us off, Mia. The first takeaway or lesson learned that I have about this year's Super Bowl teams is that you no longer need an elite NFL quarterback. Hooray. For so long, I felt like it was like either Brady or Mahomes, or especially in the AFC, it was like for 25 years, I felt like it was either Brady or Mahomes or Manning or Roethlisberger. And now we're seeing different quarterbacks making the big stage. This year it's Sam Darnold and Drake May, obviously. I think that a lot of it has to do with the importance of play calling in the NFL. I think that's like the number one kind of skill that you can bring as a coach is kind of putting players in a position to succeed. And I think that also helps to kind of build a culture because if players know that the coaches are putting them in a spot to succeed, then they're more likely to kind of like play hard or like play for that coach or what have you. And so I think like a really good example is like just looking at Trevor Lawrence. Like obviously he's developed and progressed and like done things individually on his own year over year. But like the biggest difference from like him being like kind of still like a question in terms of national perspective, in terms of whether he's a franchise quarterback, to this year where he's an MVP finalist, it's like if you had to point to one change, it's not like anything that has to do with him or even with his teammates. Is that like now he has a great play caller, and so now that as long as Liam Cohen is in Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence is healthy, like you expect them to have a top 10, top 8 offense going forward, and a large part of that is the play caller. And so obviously like Sam Darnold has Clint Kubiak, who's just hired to be or it's reported. I don't know if it's
Not
official yet.
official.
Not
Come on
official.
now.
They're working on a contract, all that BS jargon. But he's expected to be hired as the Raiders head coach. And then obviously the Patriots have Josh
Gosh.
McDaniels, who has been, we all kind of know the success that he's had in New England, winning Super Bowls with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick in the past. And so Darnold and May are getting put in very good positions to succeed, which is very important. But then beyond that, like it's not just like, oh, they have good play callers. And so like you don't need an elite quarterback anymore. You just need an elite play caller. It's not that. Like I think that what stands out for Darnold and May is that they're I think the number one thing for quarterbacks, but especially in the postseason, is like don't make mistakes, don't give the ball to the other team. But beyond that, it's generating explosives and it's performance under pressure. For the playoffs, for the postseason, among all quarterbacks who have played in the postseason, Drake May ranks first in pass rating under pressure, and Sam Darnold ranks second. The May stat is a little bit like surprising because it hasn't been the best playoff performances for him, especially relative to his MVP caliber regular season performance. But the stats do bear out that he's been playing well, or at least passing well under pressure. He has been running really well under pressure too. I know he's taking a lot of sacks, but he also has some pretty critical first downs that he's gotten with his legs. And so he's been great under pressure, especially when you consider the whole year. But then Sam Darnold, too, especially in the playoffs, has been spectacular under pressure, especially when you think about Seattle's offensive scheme and like how they want to get into heavy personnel and do a lot of deep play action shots. That takes a lot of time to just like sit in the pocket and wait for those routes to develop. And so Sam is really tough for being able to like stand in the pocket and take hits, but he's also delivering when there is pressure. And then also, so like pressure and explosive plays this season for the whole season at large, including playoffs. The Patriots rank first in explosive pass rate. The Seahawks rank sixth in explosive pass rate. And these haven't even been like elite offenses, like with elite quarterbacks or anything like that. I mean, May was elite during the regular season. But I just think that like the explosiveness for the playoffs and the regular season, it's like you don't necessarily need to have the best defense by all or the best offense by all the numbers, but you need to be able to pick up chunk gains, and that it's a huge formula in order to get you to the Super Bowl. And so, sorry for my rambling. I definitely did a lot of talking just now, but the point is you don't need a great quarterback anymore. It definitely helps to have a great offensive play caller, but offensive play calling and then a quarterback that's just good under pressure, won't crumble under pressure, and can create some big plays for you is kind of what I see as a formula now going forward, as opposed to like, do you have Tom Brady?
Yeah, exactly. That was always the question. And
Hmm.
I think that the best place to start for my thoughts as far as what we've learned from the two final teams standing in the 2025 season, Gus, is you are forgetting the one outlier in that streak of Peyton, Roethlisberger, Brady, Mahomes among the AFC representatives at the quarterback position in the 21st century. And that is Joe Flacco. And what did Joe Flacco have back in 2013? An elite defense. And
Hmm.
while I think elite defenses are harder to bottle up and preserve for more than a 3 or a 4 year period, as the Seattle Seahawks learned all too well in the early 2010s with their most recent Super Bowl runs, that is where I look at Seattle. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is John Schneider's second act as general manager. I
Hmm.
think before we talk about X's and O's and the quarterback position and some of the run tendencies and 12 personnel that I also want to mention, I want your take on that first and foremost, because this was a Seattle team that under Pete Carroll, a lot of people questioned the tendency, we'll call it, to consistently take an off ball linebacker or running back with their first two picks of the NFL draft, for better or worse. Kenneth Walker was a second round pick. I do want to note, and he's awesome. So I don't want to completely bury this idea of taking a running back high, but Schneider and Pete Carroll had a hit rate that final 3 or 4 year stretch of 20%, maybe at that. And now we look at a Seattle Seahawks draft over the last 3 years. And that, of course, dates back to the final season of Pete Carroll, but also the year prior to Mike Macdonald arriving as the head coach. Just take a listen. And a lot of this for me, Gus, goes to the point of if you can do these three things, you will be a great general manager in the NFL or EVP or whatever you are. Number one, get the coach right. We know Seattle got the coach right. We'll have more on that here in just a second. Number two, get the quarterback right. Feels like they did, but to your point, getting the quarterback right is not finding this blue chipper or this 7-time Super Bowl champion like it used to be. And then number three, not just hit on your draft picks, but hit on your first and second round draft picks who are expected to become instant starters. Let's briefly run through the last three drafts for the Seattle Seahawks. Gray Zabel was their first round pick. He's a starting guard for them on this Super Bowl team. Nicky Manwari was their first pick of the second round. awesome safety, the new Kyle Hamilton for many. And then Elijah Arroyo, I understand maybe he's not George Kittle per se, but at the same time, the rookie tight end out of Miami has been a factor. And this is also a Seahawks team that has multiple tight ends who can hurt you. More on that in just a second. The year prior, Byron Murphy in the first round, obviously an instant starter. They did not have a second round pick. In 2023, the final year of Pete Carroll and John Schneider, Devin Witherspoon and Jackson Smith and Jigba in the first round. Oh, by the way, Derek Hall and Zach Charbonnet in the second. They're not even going to be able to pay Derek Hall at this rate because the year prior to that, so give Pete some credit. The year of Kenneth Walker was also Boye Mafe in the second round and Charles Cross, one of their bookends in the first round. And then we get the, Dwayne Eskridge and Jordan Brooks and the LJ Collier. We get those in the next three successive drafts. Never forget Rashad Penny in 2018, speaking of. So the point is, they went from one of the worst four straight draft classes, you could argue five or six, to having arguably the best last four draft hauls of any team in the league. And that's where I think a lot of this starts. So many of these players for Seattle are homegrown. They are still on rookie contracts. That proves to me that if you draft well, you do not have to have Band-Aid free agent fixes. Now, on the flip side of that, New England had to have that because they did not draft well until this year in the final seasons of Bill Belichick. And that is where I give Mike Vrabel a lot of credit to your point of he was able to identify these are guys that fit my structure, fit my culture. Let's bring them in. I know I work well with Harold Landry. I know I can build a strong enough culture that Stephon Diggs and Cardi B are not going to get in the way of what we're trying to do here. And in turn, we can use those temporary fixes to hold us over until we are able to draft adequately and bring in our own guys. So for me, it begins and ends before we get into the minutia of it all with how both of these rosters were constructed, both to the synergy that they are striving to achieve, but also the hit rate, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. And like obviously Super Bowl teams are not built in one season. Like it takes multiple years to accumulate into these types of rosters. But I think it's especially a good point for the Seahawks where like I really like that you brought up the point of like Schneider like letting go with Pete Carroll and then like making the hire to bring in Mike McDonald, like kind of like recognizing that like Pete's scheme and like he's a great coach and a great person, but like it's just kind of like was time to move on. And then like not even just making the call to move on, but then like bringing in a new voice, someone that's like pushing where modern scheme and NFL offenses and defenses are going, to be able to find that next guy. So like it kind of starts with that. And then obviously like I was one of many people who had no idea why the Seahawks chose to trade away Geno Smith and acquire or sign Sam Darnold. I thought that was like a huge mistake and kind of a blatant downgrade. And so, again, I'm one of many people who are wrong about that. But it's been like the hiring of the coach, the signing of the quarterback, great draft picks. But like even for the Legion of Boom, it was kind of like they paired a legendary coach with a legendary scheme with some legendary drafted players between Earl
Bingo.
Thomas, Richard Sherman, Bobby Wagner. Like they drafted like multiple Hall of Fame players into like a 2 or 3 year span, which was nuts. But this year it's been like they certainly drafted great players as you've outlined, but they also signed Sam Darnold. They traded for Leonard Williams a couple seasons ago, which no one really thought at the time was like a groundbreaking deal. They signed DeMarcus Lawrence this offseason. And so there's been like a lot of different ways that they've been getting talent into the building. I think you could say similar things about New England. Like the Stephon Diggs trade certainly comes to mind. I believe he was traded for, or
Yes, I think he
maybe it
was. I
was
think
just a
you're right.
signing. Either way, he was like picked up as a veteran option. It's not like it's just draft and develop for these two teams. But yeah, like certainly Schneider gets all the credit in the world. Like I wonder why his drafting was so bad in the middle there, like between recent times and the Legion of Boom. Like was it because he was kind of like drafting with Pete and like Pete's ideas were just kind of getting old and like Pete wanted to trade 2 first round picks for Jamal Adams and then as soon as Pete left the building, like Schneider could kind of do more of what he wanted. I think that's definitely a
Yeah.
reasonable explanation. Also just like small sample size, like we all talk about like every draft season about how like the draft is a crapshoot. Like that's why it's always better to trade back and acquire picks just to get more swings at the bat because it's such a random event and you really don't know how it's going to turn out and how drafted players are going to turn out. And so like maybe it's just like regression and then regression again in Snyder's case. But yeah, there's been a lot of key major decisions made, not just this past calendar year, but in multiple previous years that have led to this point. So I think that's a great takeaway for sure.
Yeah, I think that it was a lot of let's just call it Philadelphia West.
Mm.
Howie Roseman has gotten more power, and I don't know exactly how much power John Schneider has comparatively to when he was Pete Carroll's GM, but it does feel like these are more of his picks. But I also think, and you bring up a great point, Mike McDonald, someone who I love the Sports Illustrated article, the story that Greg Bishop did. And maybe it's just because I also teach leadership at UNF. Mike McDonald was in this cohort at the University of Georgia in the business school because he did not play college football, which I know some look down upon. But this was a man who truly loved the sport, was coaching high school football while he was in college in Athens, but also was developing his leadership honus as well as his business acumen. And that's where I just think like that's a guy who, yes, maybe he's not the most extroverted guy in the world or maybe the most bubbly, but he's someone who knew how to build a framework of a team and how to motivate people. And so I really enjoyed it, and I wanted to shout out that story because I also want to pair it with this, Gus, my other big takeaway. And this is something that's being debated around the league this week at Super Bowl week out in San Francisco because of the nature of the coaching carousel seemingly coming to a halt with Clint Kubiak expected to be hired as the next coach of the Raiders, the final vacancy in this coaching hiring cycle. I understand, and it is disappointing that there still perhaps is not the representation that many hope to see from minority coaches, especially in this hiring cycle. Peter Schrager, though, pointed out from ESPN that part of that stems from number one, if men of color are not coordinators first, especially offensive coordinators, because as you alluded to, a lot of ownership groups are leaning towards offensive minded head coaches so that even if the coordinator gets plucked, the system remains the same. So therefore, if you don't have people of color in those situations, then they're not more likely to get plucked. Who is in that situation? Who is the up and coming offensive coordinator? 9 times out of 10, it's a Sean McVay guy. And if there is one thing that I have learned over the last month watching the league, it is if you have attached yourself to Sean McVay, you have a pretty good shot at getting a job. If for no other reason, then the hit rate is so darn high. Like, who's the worst McVay disciple right now? Who's a head coach? Zach Taylor? He went to a Super Bowl. Like,
Probably
that's
Mike
what
LaFleur, but he hasn't really been a head coach yet. So
he's been a head
point
coach
taken.
for 5 minutes,
Yeah,
and that's my point. Like Mike McVay, LOL. Mike LaFleur is getting that job because of his proximity to Sean McVay.
totally.
And you can't fault the Cardinals. You can't fault the league for that. It's
No.
ultimately because that's where we have seen the most success and we have to go off that track record. And so I think what you're also seeing, because neither head coach in the Super Bowl this year is a McVay disciple, but you are seeing two coaches who are on the defensive side of the ball who are one of one in terms of building culture and building infrastructure. And not to mention with Jesse Minter's hire in Baltimore and Mike McDonald's ties to Baltimore, you could argue that basically if you're an ownership group next year looking for your next head coach, you're going to go pluck from the McVay tree, you're going to pluck from the Minter McDonald Baltimore tree, or you're going to find a leader of men. Like it's one of the three. And that's what the Titans ultimately did with Robert Saleh too, by the way. Like it's one of the three. And that's it. And I would argue that the McVay tree connection is greater than any of the others.
I almost feel like the McVay hires like all kind of like happen for the wrong reason. Like it's like all like, oh, like we know that this has worked out in the past. There's a good track record. Like obviously we want some kind of connection to Sean McVay, but like I feel like it's mostly just like owners being like, yeah, like we want a really good offense, like we want to score points, as opposed to being like, oh yeah, Sean McVay and his staff are like really have like a modern scheme. They're pushing the game forward. Like this is what the league is going to look like for the next 3 to 4 years. So we want to get on top of like what's coming next. It's kind of like goes back to familiarity. And I do think that like the nepotism in the NFL is like somewhat makes sense because like it makes sense to like bring all your friends to a job with you and to like have familiarity with like people that you've worked with and like to know like yeah, Clint Kubiak has been in the league for a long time because his dad was a head coach too. And like yeah, that creates some like unfair kind of positionings in order
Connections.
for people
Yeah.
to get jobs above others. But like it makes sense. Like I get it. But even still, it's like obviously a problem in the league. And so hopefully there will be more minority coaches that get hired so that they can bring maybe more minority friends into the
Right.
league and kind of even it out.
And you can make the argument Nate Scheelhaase has next. He's expected to be named the OC with the Los Angeles Rams with Mike LaFleur's departure. And he is a man of color. So the hope is that he would get a bite at the apple next cycle
Hmm.
after interviewing, I believe it ended up being 5 locales this cycle. Plus, you've also got Thomas Brown, who is a part of this New England staff going up against the Seattle Seahawks in the Super Bowl, who was the interim head coach for the Bears, longtime friend of Sean McVay. And again, that's an example of Sean McVay putting someone in a position. He made him the passing game coordinator and tight ends coach after Shane Waldron, ironically, left to go become the OC of the Seattle Seahawks. That's McVay trying his best to put people in those title positions on the offensive side of the ball. That is where teams are hiring from. And it's part of why, shout out to Vrabel and McDonald. It's why they're both one of one, I think. The fact that we have 2 defensive coaches in the Super Bowl this year really, really surprises me.
For sure. To really relate it back to the Jaguars, what you just said about McVay and like kind of having an infrastructure because he knows so many coaches are leaving. One cool thing that he and the Rams do is that they like give assistant coaches like a lot of power. Sean McVay is a play caller, but he has kind of like different guys on his staff. Like one will be kind of like the red zone play caller. One will be like they have like kind of different situational play callers. So then the guy will like say a play call in McVay's ear, and McVay would be like, okay, yeah, let's roll with that. Because then that gives like like gives the assistants and stuff like that like a little bit of play calling experience, kind of gets them a little bit ready, more ready to kind of like take on more responsibilities at a different job if they get promoted elsewhere. But it also helps McVay because it's not like he can't do it all himself. He needs to be able to like I don't know, delegate work out to other people so that like when someone leaves, like he's not just completely screwed because that one person was doing so much for him. So I'm interested to see like and hear about like what that kind of looks like in Jacksonville because obviously like they kept both coordinators, Grant Udinski and Anthony Campanile, but we and everyone else in the country kind of like, expects those guys to be like some of the 2 next guys up in terms of future NFL head coaches. And like brain drain hasn't really happened for Jacksonville yet, but it's inevitable, honestly. And so how they kind of like go about that, developing not just players but also coaches, is I think just generally kind of a underrated storyline or what topic or whatever you want to call it in the NFL.
And you can rest assured, Gus, if the Seattle Seahawks find themselves in an early 10-0 hole on Sunday night, everyone's going to say it's because Clint Kubiak was too focused on the Raiders. He was too
Mm,
focused on the interview, even though he keeps telling everybody in the Bay Area this week that he's not thinking about the Raiders. He is focused on the Super Bowl. It's going to happen. Do I think they're going to go into a 10-0 hole? I do not, but I
yeah.
digress.
Dude, that's like the hardest like position ever. Like how are you preparing for the most important game of your life while also preparing for the most important job interview of your life? Like I that's crazy to me. I feel kind of bad for coaches. I feel like the hiring cycle should happen after the Super Bowl, but the content machine rolls on.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the same thing as NIL. It's the same thing as a transfer portal. Like, it's the same thing as women's basketball, since obviously I also cover that. Like, this idea of the college season ends and the next week the WNBA draft takes place. Like, unfortunately, this is the calendar and this is the hand that we've been dealt. And
Hmm.
because sports are a 365-day per year business, this is just unfortunately what they have to do. And look, Clint Kubiak's going to make a lot of money from Tom Brady and the Davis family, so he's going to be just fine, just
Yeah,
fine.
for sure.
One
First
other
world
note,
problem.
a couple X's and O's points that I wanted to hit, Gus. One thing that's really surprised me with Seattle and their defense is obviously, I think they have a very legitimate argument to say they were the most dominant defense wire to wire throughout the 2025 season. But they don't lead the league, at least in the regular season, they did not lead the league in any one major category. And
Mm.
that was really interesting to me. They were tied for 7th in sacks with 47, so top 10 to be fair, but they weren't putting up these astronomical numbers like we saw the Denver Broncos put up. They were 21st in turnover margin at -3. Now, to be fair, they were top 6 in total turnovers created with 25. It was because they gave the ball away a couple of times here and there. Thank you, Sammy Darnold. That's the reason they had a -3 turnover differential that had them 21st in the league. But it's interesting because I feel like every time you turn on the tape, you're like, oh my gosh, they passed the eye test. Like, they're so electric. They're creating turnovers, they're flying around. That interior of the defensive line, the push that they are able to create, how vital that is because they don't have a quote unquote Nick Benito on the outside. Although I'd argue like they've got like 7 dudes who have to eat at some point. So you got to
Hmm.
have those waves of pass rushers. But I've been really fascinated if you are going to look statistic by statistic. Seattle is just pretty much a solid A- B plus across the board, as opposed to like the Denver Broncos. Oh, well, they're really good at in getting after the quarterback. Maybe they're not as great in run defense.
I almost feel like that's like a compliment to the Seahawks, honestly.
It
Like
is.
obviously it would be nice to like be ranked first in like all the categories, I guess, but to be great at everything and not have any weaknesses is definitely a good thing. Like I've seen a lot of people hyping up Hunter Henry props for the Super Bowl, the Patriots tight end, because the Seahawks are like not great statistically against tight ends. But it's not even that like they're not bad against tight ends. It's just that they're like not amazing against tight ends and they're like pretty much amazing against everything else. And so like I don't necessarily like disagree with people who think like Hunter Henry will be a good game, will have a good game, but like at some point like you gotta have a weakness somewhere. And like the Seahawks linebackers are good, but like it's not like it's like Fred Warner and whoever else out there.
Right,
Uh,
exactly. I mean, any number of San Francisco 49ers linebackers, whether it's Dre Greenlaw, who's now off to greener pastures in Denver, or if it's who's the kid who D Winters who came in, like
yeah,
was like the
yeah.
like sixth string linebacker. You had Tatum Bethune out of Florida State out here. He's like
I
half
think
the
they
size of
signed
Fred
Kaiser
Warner.
White in the playoffs, which is wild to do.
Yeah, credit to San Francisco, which we've got a nice
Hmm.
saucy stat coming up for you guys on ESPN Radio because Gus, I'm sure you've seen in the modern Super Bowl era, there's only one coach who has won his first Super Bowl after his ninth season with the club.
Mm.
And so, Kyle Shanahan, you have been put on notice, my friend. Even though I quote you every single day and I say that we all live day to day, we are all day to day, in the words of Kyle Shanahan, just file that one away. It's probably part of why Sean McDermott got canned in Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a time, and especially like when you're hooked up with an elite quarterback, like that would be kind of what I like fight back with for Shanahan is that like he's only had Purdy for a couple of years, so like if he and Purdy are together for 6, 7 years and they don't win a Super Bowl, then like it's probably time to move on from at least one of them just to like move on and start fresh and see what you can do with someone else. Because yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Me and my last take about the Super Bowl teams kind of goes back to your last one when you're talking about how great the interior defensive line is for the Seahawks. Uh, it also somewhat goes back to my first take about quarterbacks. Is like I feel like the mantra for so long was like in terms of team building, like you need an elite quarterback, and then like once you find an elite quarterback, focus on the trenches, build up the trenches. You want to have great offensive and defensive line. And so far, the past couple of weeks, I've been saying that Jacksonville's biggest need entering the 2026 offseason is offensive line because I agree with everyone that like certainly the pass rush needs to get better. They need to be better than they've been like bottom 8 in sack total for 5 straight seasons. They need more sacks. They need more pressures. They need more just juice up front. Obviously, like we saw in the wild card round, lost to Buffalo. The secondary is a little bit undermanned. You could definitely use some upgrades there, but I think the offensive line is the biggest need for Jacksonville, just because like it's certainly like good enough and more than good enough, but I think it can be more than good enough. Like you have a franchise quarterback in place right now, so I think like the number one priority should just be protecting him. But I think also like with Cohen here, like the thing to maximize not just Trevor's ability, but also Liam's offense is to have like a dynamite offensive line. I think it was kind of like actually holding back Liam from some play calls during the regular season. Not that like the offensive line was like a liability or anything like that, but just if you have a great offensive line, you can just kind of you have more options and you can like expand your playbook a little bit. I specifically think that Jacksonville like could be a little bit more vertical. Trevor Lawrence is really good as an intermediate and deep thrower in 2025, but like a lot, even the deep passes were all like 15 to 20 or 20 to 25 yards. Like you can throw it farther than that. And I think that the main reason they didn't is because they didn't have the offensive line to be able to protect for long enough, consistently enough. But all that said, now that I'm looking at the Super Bowl teams, I'm like, these teams have some fantastic defensive lines. And so I definitely would like to see the Jaguars do more, especially to add to their edge rotation than they did in 2025. But the offensive lines are like kind of meh. Like they're kind of just like band-aided together. And then I think also when you think about like not just these two Super Bowl teams, but also some of the best offenses in the league, like McVay was able to get around kind of like an up and down offensive line for a couple of years. Mike McDaniel in Miami had an awful offensive line, except for the left tackle who's a star. I'm forgetting his name, but
Patrick
he
Paul.
had. Hmm?
Patrick Paul.
Patrick Paul. There was someone else, like someone that came from the Saints. He's a veteran. I think he might have retired a year or two ago. Anyway, they've only had like one at max good offensive lineman in Miami. Mike McDaniel is still scheming up great offenses. Kyle Shanahan, another great example. He hasn't had a great offensive line. I feel like pretty much his entire tenure in San Francisco. And again, he's got an elite offensive tackle in Trent Williams, but the rest of the line is pretty shaky. And so like we've seen all these great offensive coaches being able to like kind of like scheme and work around a not elite offensive line. And so I think again, when you're thinking about the Super Bowl teams, like maybe you don't need an elite one. Maybe more than good enough, like is good enough. What do you think about Mia? Like, I think we can agree that like teams need a good pass rush. They need a great pass rush in order to be viable title contenders. But what do you think about like how much the Jaguars or even just teams in general should prioritize the offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously has to be a priority, but at the same time, you'd be hard pressed to find a team in the league that has five Pro Bowlers along the same offensive line. Like, that's
Yeah.
just unrealistic. And that's where you can go out to San Francisco, and Kyle Shanahan will tell you, so long as he had a good enough center and he had Trent Williams, he could figure out the other three spots. And so I do not think that you cannot sit here and continue to be like, well, the offensive line has to be better for Trevor and blah blah blah. Like, like some people locally like to do. Like it's an easy scapegoat. It always is. I will present to you a chicken or the egg question.
Okay.
Do you need to have an elite offensive line to run the football effectively? Because these are two squads that more so the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots have been able to run the ball when they need to run the football. It was something that Denver could not do in the snow in the AFC Championship game, but New England with Ramondre Stevenson, he of the many fumbles that plagued my fantasy football team this year, were able to do. And I would also couple that with something I am really excited, and maybe you're going to pop on Club 904 and we're going to dive deeper into this at some point in time. I am fascinated to see with the tight end usage, the heavy personnel packages, 12, 13 from Sean McVay in the NFC Championship game throughout the NFC playoffs. To be fair, in their opening round game against the Panthers, I think they were in 11 personnel. I don't have it in front of me, like 60 some odd percent of the time. They were in 11 personnel 14% of the time against Seattle. Like astounding numbers. Jacksonville, of course, was in 11 personnel about 60% of the time in 2025 because of the groupings and the personnel that they had. But I am so intrigued to see not just Liam Cohen in Jacksonville, other McVay disciples, other offensive play callers, roster constructioners around the league. Are you going to look at what McVay is doing, and just because McVay is doing it, will you adapt to that? Can you run the football in the way Seattle has been able to, not just because they've invested in their offensive line, but because they too trot out these multiple tight end looks each and every play?
So to answer your question, I think that in order to have an efficient offense, an efficient rushing offense in terms of like down to down to consistency, so if you measure it by success rate, you need a great offensive line in order to just like consistently churn out 4, 5, 6 yards at a time and like basically impose your will against defenses, be able to like run out the clock during fourth quarters, etc. But I think in order to have an explosive rushing game, you need an explosive running back. Like I think that the reason that the Patriots and Seahawks rushing offenses have been adequate this year is because of their running backs. I'm a huge fan of Ramondre Stevenson and New England. I think that he's like, especially before this year, been like pretty underrated by the masses. But like Henderson, on the other hand, Travion
Mm-hmm.
Henderson, the Patriots rookie, like he's not even like necessarily a good NFL player, but he's a sick athlete and he will chew up those explosives. I feel like we haven't really seen a ton during the playoffs, but we saw a lot during the second half of his rookie season this year. And then for the Seahawks, obviously they've got Kenneth Murray who can like make something out of nothing. We saw the best example of that in the NFC Championship game when there was three, if not four, Rams defenders that came to met him in the hole, and he simply outran everyone to the edge. And so those two guys, I think, are like players to watch in this Super Bowl. And then like to kind of like pertain it to the Jaguars, like I think that'd be a reason to re-sign Travis Etienne is that like you'd hope that he's like continues to get more and more efficient on a down to down basis, but like while he can improve, like the biggest thing that would improve that for him would be a better offensive line. But like you can't really teach explosiveness. You can't really like teach breaking tackles out in open space, and that is what ETN can offer. And so that does make him valuable. Liam Cohen actually said like halfway through the season that like running backs get paid by whether or not like by how good they are out in open space, like more than 10 yards downfield. And I thought that was a pretty like eye-opening quote just because it was in the middle of the season. It's not like he was like concerned about any like contracts or negotiations or anything like that. But I mean, regardless of VTN, like the Jags also have Bashal Tune, who's very explosive. He was actually more efficient than he was explosive in 2025. So that was kind of interesting considering his kind of college profile being such a speedster at Virginia Tech. But yeah, that was a lot of rambling. I think that for explosive running games, you need a
Yep.
great running back, but for like just efficient, really
Down to
sound,
down.
can like finish and like play through all four quarters. Yeah, you need that offensive line. And so that also goes in hand, like I mentioned, the vertical passing game under Cohen and how I think that like the offensive line somewhat held that back. I think more than anything in the running game, the Jaguars were kind of held back and like they ended up majoring in mid zone, which is mostly just because it was like somewhat like relatively easy for the offensive line, and then it like was able to kind of maximize Brenton Strange as a blocker in space. So yeah, Mia, we got like 2 more minutes left in this podcast. So score prediction, prop bets you like, final takes, let it loose, let it
Yeah,
rip.
I'm gonna go with Seattle 24-10 over the
Mm.
Patriots. I'm going for a two-touchdown margin of victory for Seattle just because I think they've got everything humming right now. And I ultimately think that this Patriots offense has been skating by throughout the postseason. They've been maximizing their opportunities. I just don't think Seattle's going to give them all that many opportunities.
Yeah, you said actually earlier that Seattle is kind of like Philadelphia of the West, which I love because mostly just because I guess like I think that this Super Bowl could end up shaking out like last year's where the Eagles versus the Chiefs. Like we were all super excited going into it, but the Eagles at the end of the day were just like superiorly like way more talented. And so I think that's going to be what we see on Sunday. My final score prediction is Seahawks 23, Patriots 13. So pretty
Wow.
similar to yours. We both see it being kind of a two-score game. I think Sam Darnold needs to have multiple turnovers and Drake May needs to be Superman in order for it to be close. But
Which could
hopefully,
happen.
which it could happen.
Never doubt Mike Vrabel.
That's a beautiful thing about this sport is that it's a one game. It's just 60 minutes for the most part. Anything can happen. So very much looking forward to Sunday. Very much looking forward to much more off-season content. Mia, we'll be having you back on at some point. Thank you very much for your time. Make sure to check out Mia's work and check out Duval22.com. I'll be posting some Super Bowl props at some point this weekend. I'll try to get them up on Friday or Saturday instead of waiting to the last minute. But yeah, check out both of our work and enjoy the big game. Until next time, thank you all so much. Adios.